BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin.
Okay, hello everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. Now, there are a couple of ongoing series that are available here on this program. One of them is about the Phantom Killer, and that comes out every Wednesday. The Phantom Killer is another unidentified serial killer mystery from 1946, and it's very similar to the story of the Zodiac Killer. But on the weekends, I have also launched a bonus episode series talking about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey from 1996. And thank you so much to everyone who has been listening to that one. The comments have been pouring in. And as you see, this is now December, and I had wanted to do that book discussion for a while. It's actually a book discussion on Presumed Guilty by Stephen Singular, talking about the JonBenet Ramsey case. I had wanted to do that discussion for a while, but also it seems rather fitting because JonBenet, of course, passed away right after Christmas in 1996. So there are a lot of true crime discussions available here on this channel, and you can always like and subscribe if you want to follow along with them, as well as sharing with your friends and family on social media if you know somebody who is curious about true crime cases, unsolved mysteries, as well as just something that might turn up for the Anything Goes Friday segment. So there are a lot of ways that you can help out with the channel, and a great way to do that is to go over to BuyMeACoffee.com. This website allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Mondays. And there is now the super thanks on YouTube, which also allows you to contribute. I don't want to say any more than that because I do not want to get distracted from something that I think is a rather impressive find. And this is indeed the Zodiac Killer News Report. So talking about some of the actual Zodiac news, I saw in one of the Zodiac Killer Facebook groups that there was a new find from someone named Sefer Karimi. I've talked to Sefer in the past, and he is the one who proposed that the desktop poem that was found in 1966 after the murder of Sherry Jo Bates may have been a tribute to the poet R.H. Barlow, and it's actually written in somewhat of a similar style. R.H. Barlow was a poet who was a good friend of H.P. Lovecraft, but there was a post saying that the Zodiac Killer may have been inspired by the comic series Weird, Spooky, and Supernatural Stories from the Beyond, and the Beyond seems to be the full name for the comic. And there was one panel that says, "Soon after your death you shall be my slave, just as all those who came to my island served me as the undead." And another character says, "I've nothing to lose. It's either death or an eternity of hell serving this fiendish woman." And instantly, some of you are perhaps going to notice that this is similar to the Zodiac Killer's Z408 cipher, the first cipher that was composed by the Zodiac Killer. Not only did the Zodiac commit murders, but he also mailed in letters and ciphers. And the first one was mailed in July of 1969, on July 31st actually. And it said, "I like killing people because it's so much fun. It's even more fun than hunting wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all." And that is almost certainly either a reference to the most dangerous game or a parody of it. Now, it doesn't have to be the actual short story, The Most Dangerous Game, but it introduces the concept of how the Zodiac Killer wanted to hunt people for sport. And some people genuinely believe that the Zodiac was a strong fan of comic books. Evidence of this is that the Zodiac would mail the Halloween card in 1970, which featured the words by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire, which has since been traced back to a Tim Holt comic book featuring the Wheel of Death, although it's possible again that it's coming from different sources, but these are sources that have been identified that are using very esoteric Zodiac language. Now, the Zodiac seems to be borrowing ideas from comic books, so this could have been a very direct inspiration. Weird, spooky, and supernatural stories from the beyond, and I mean, it's talking about the exact concept. Soon after your death, you shall be my slave. The entire concept of having slaves in some sort of afterlife. And I've said this on the channel before, but I think it's an important reiteration that the ancient Egyptians had this belief, and this was discussed on the show The Bible Geek, saying that Pharaoh thought that he would die and be reborn in paradise, and those who were his slaves in this life would be slaves in the afterlife. So the concept of slaves in the afterlife could have been something about the Zodiac trying to act like some type of Egyptian pharaoh, and I think that that is a reasonably interesting thing to explore. However, I would like to keep going with this concept of ciphers because the Zodiac not only mailed in the Z408, in 1969 the Zodiac would mail the Z340, and these are the two ciphers from the Zodiac which have been decoded. And I had the opportunity to correspond with somebody named Robert O, and he shared something with me about a Zodiac suspect named Robert E. Hunter recently. If you go back to some of the older Zodiac killer news reports from this year, I was talking about his suspect, Robert Hunter. However, he did share some things about how the numbers Z408 and Z340 might not actually be arbitrary. There might be specific reasons why they were chosen. And of course, they get their names because of the number of symbols in them. But does anybody think that it's weird that the Zodiac's first cipher had 408 characters and the second one had 340? I don't know why, but for some reason I thought that it would get bigger as opposed to getting smaller, but the Zodiac chose to put 340 in the second cipher, and what Robert O pointed out is that 408 and 340 are actually numbers that are used in astronomy, and particularly with the identification of not exactly dwarf planets, but of parts of the asteroid belt. And I really don't want to downplay this one. A lot of you might be hearing that and just thinking, oh, well, wait a second, this is going to be just some far out, no way it's actually true situation. But once I read the thing in its entire context, I thought that it was rather interesting. Robert O wrote out this message here. Hello, Ned. I have found the best clue yet in the Zodiac case. Max Wolf discovered minor planets called 340 Edwarda and 408 Fama. 340 Edwarda was discovered by Wolf on September 25th of 1892. He named it after Heinrich Edward von Lada. Von Lada was a banker and amateur astronomer who retired to cultivate fruit and wine. And when it says minor planets, I did a little bit of reading on these 340 Edwarda and 408 Fama, and they appear to be part of the asteroid belt, but I mean, sometimes they're referred to as minor planets, other times they're referred to as asteroids. And I've thought about this for a while about why these numbers were chosen 340 and 408 for the number of characters in the ciphers, and some of you might just be thinking, well, there's no possible way that there's any connection to astronomy because this guy's obviously just writing out a message and it has 408 characters or it has 340 characters. And what's the point of attributing a meaning to that? Well, if we go back to some of our discussions on the Z18 code, the final line of the 408 cipher, which has yet to have been decoded. The Z18 has 18 symbols that don't have an exact meaning to this day, and both Michael Cole, author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy, and Richard Grinnell of ZodiacCiphers.com stated that they believe that the Z18 does not have any precise meaning, and that it might actually be a set of characters that are filler. Why would you include filler as the last line of a cipher when you didn't have to? It could have been a mistake, or it could have had an exact and precise meaning. There could have been a reason why there is a line in the 408 cipher that is uncoded, and was this person leaving some type of astronomical clue, or even to connect it with what people think in a much larger context, that the zodiac was not inspired by astrology as much as he was inspired by astronomy. And I said Michael Cole wrote the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. He talks a lot about that. And he even points out that the Zodiac might have had celestial navigation knowledge. It's most likely that he read the book The American Practical Navigator. Maybe he was ex-Navy or ex-Air Force. And there are all types of references in navigation and the American Practical Navigator to things like radians or using angles to conduct navigation. And the Zodiac Killer talked about radians, and he even said that the location of a bomb that he had planted concerned radians and inches along the radians. So at first I thought that this thing, with the minor planets was a little bit far out, but again, in a larger context, that could have been a possibility, and we won't know until the author of the 408 cipher and the 340 cipher is truly identified. But something that I want to reinforce over and over again is, at first, the Zodiac mystery seemed absolutely unsolvable. However, I think that over time we are learning more and more about these true crime discussions. People thought that they would never solve the 340 cipher, but that was solved. And there have been too many true crime discoveries in the last 10 months alone to count. So I think that we might actually get some stronger answers in the Zodiac Killer mystery within the next 5 years. Now, last year on the channel, I did a 4-part book discussion on Zodiac Killer Just the Facts by Tom Voigt. It is the typed version of the police reports, and it isn't so much giving commentary on the case as it is recreating the police reports in an organized format. And I did the 4-part response because one was about the Zodiac Killer's first attack at Lake Herman Road, the second one was about Blue Rock Springs, the second attack, the third one was about the third attack at Lake Berryessa, and of course the fourth one was about the Stein murder, the Zodiac's final confirmed crime. And there was a comment that came in on the episode Zodiac Killer Just the Facts Lake Berryessa that is actually more focused on the Blue Rock Springs shooting, but it came in on the Lake Berryessa episode. The Blue Rock Springs shooting was when the Zodiac Killer murdered Darlene Ferrin on the 4th of July, and she was actually pronounced dead on July 5th at 12:38 a.m. And not only was Darlene Ferrin shot, but her friend Mike Mageau was shot as well, and Mike Mageau becomes the subject of a lot of theories and speculation because he was wearing 5 shirts and 3 pairs of pants on the 4th of July, and he appeared in the documentary. This is the Zodiac speaking, saying that he was wearing all of these extra layers of clothes because he was very skinny and he was insecure about his skinny body type. And we have a comment here from Lance Vance, who wrote into that episode saying, Ned, I normally enjoy most of the content you create, so I would like to point out ahead of time that I don't intend for any of this to come off as me being angry or malicious, but I have to ask at 50 minutes and 6 seconds, why did you decide to sarcastically comment on Mike Mageau's chances of having sex just because he was wearing more shirts and pants than what's typically considered normal? He said it himself that he was very skinny back then and he wore extra clothes to give off the appearance of being bigger than he actually was. It may seem silly to most who have never had that issue, but speaking as someone who's also been on the slender side of body types and has experienced the feelings of humiliation that can come with being a skinny guy, I can totally understand why he chose to do that, even if I know that it doesn't work, and tends to have the opposite effect intended. It obviously didn't matter to Darlene, as she evidently liked him enough to drive to a secluded area with him, so he at least must have been doing something right. Besides, after the absolute horror that he had experienced that night, and then lived with the memories for the rest of his life, I think he's been through quite enough and has earned the right to not have people making fun of the poor yet harmless sense of fashion he had when he was a teenager, especially when it really doesn't pertain to the case itself. I hope you don't take this criticism the wrong way. I just found that remark to be wholly unnecessary. And, I mean, I didn't remember the exact remark, and there was a timestamp, so I listened to that once again on the episode Zodiac Killer Just the Facts Lake Berryessa. And I was talking about how if Mike Mageau had gone to the park to be intimate with Darlene Ferrin, and he was wearing 5 shirts and 3 pairs of pants, that would have caused difficulties in the attempt to become intimate, and I was only stating that as a fact. I absolutely did not intend for it to come across as sarcastic or come across as making fun of his choices to wear more clothes or even to put down anybody who is dealing with some type of body image issue. So simply stating it as a fact that it would be more difficult to be involved in intimate situations if he's wearing 3 pairs of pants and 5 shirts. So that relates to the questions and reasons why Mike Mageau was with Darlene Ferrin at the park. Firstly, Darlene Ferrin was married. They are often described as friends, however, Mike Mageau seems like he had a very strong interest in Darlene Ferrin romantically. There's even a story out there that he once said that he was in love with her even though she was married, and that still seems to be a little bit up in the air. But there's also an alternative theory that Mike Mageau was not telling the truth about wearing the 5 shirts and 3 pairs of pants because of body image issues, and maybe my skepticism came across in that episode as well. Close listeners of Black Box Online Radio will know that I've talked about this theory in the past that Mike Mageau was a cat burglar, and the reason why he's wearing these extra layers of clothes is because a burglar could break into somebody's house and then steal items and then throw them in a pillowcase or a bag, run down the street, turn the corner, and then shed a layer of clothes. He's no longer wearing blue jeans and a red shirt. He's now wearing black pants and a green shirt. And the witness description has been completely altered. And Thomas Henry Horn, author of The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, talks about this a lot. And Evan from Texas did a very large presentation on this in his second Zodiac Killer video on the Blue Rock Springs shooting, just to share some people who have looked at this exact theory and that Mike Mageau perhaps had some plans for illegal activity later on, but that begs the question about why would he be wearing these extra layers of clothes on the 4th of July when he was not actively participating in the crime? I mean, it would have been very easy to keep 3 shirts in the back seat of a car and another pair of pants in the back seat of a car, but I absolutely did not mean any disrespect intended toward people who deal with body image issues. Last week on the channel, I was talking about the 1970 murder of John Leonard and a possible Zodiac killer connection that has been discussed rather frequently on the internet. It has generated somewhat of a buzz, so to speak. And I would like to continue with that, but firstly, to provide a little bit more background information on John Leonard, I would like to go to the website crimewatchpa.com. On Tuesday, September 8, 1970, at approximately 3:45 p.m., John William Leonard Sr. was located deceased in his taxicab on the grounds of the Buck Hill Falls Lodge, also known as the Buck Hill Falls Inn, in Barrett Township in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. John Leonard's black 1966 Plymouth sedan was discovered approximately 150 feet off the main entrance to the lodge in a slightly secluded area. John Leonard was pronounced dead at the scene, with the cause of death being multiple gunshot wounds. At approximately 2:40 p.m., mixed taxi service received a call from a white male requesting Buck Hill Falls to Mountain Home, PA. Now wait a second, I just have to jump in. How do they know he was white like 100% if it's a phone call? I know that people can guess, but even if it's a Caucasian who showed up to tell somebody's voice over the phone, too much. William Leonard left Mick's taxi garage in Cresco for the 2-mile ride to Buck Hill Falls. The last radio contact with John Leonard was at 2:44 p.m. An employee of the lodge saw John Leonard going up the drive toward the main building on the hotel property. The employee saw John Leonard's taxi stop, and a white male with dark hair between the age of 30 to 40 entered the vehicle. The unknown male approached the taxi and was wearing a green and blue windbreaker with dark pants and dark frame glasses. The male was carrying a Globe store bag. John William Leonard Sr. was 52 years old at the time of the murder, and he was the father of 5 young children. John Leonard was a World War II veteran and had been a prisoner of war for 22 months. The investigation remains open, and the Pennsylvania State Police are interested in speaking with anyone that has information on the case. So obviously, they've tried to connect a few dots and say that the guy on the phone must have been the guy who was the shooter because he was a Caucasian. I just didn't like this whole thing about how a white male has called in. But that's not even what I wanted to talk to you about. One of you guys in the comments section pointed out that this crime took place in Pennsylvania. And recently, the composite sketch of the shooter in the John Leonard murder was released, and some people think that he looks a lot like the Zodiac sketches after the murder of Paul Stine. And it's more than that. Both of these men are taxi drivers. But what one of you guys pointed out was that the crime took place on September 8th, 1970, and it's in Pennsylvania. All of the Zodiac killer's confirmed crimes took place in California. So how on earth is this going to be working? Because there's another possible Zodiac killer incident that took place near Labor Day of 1970. And I was so focused on the Pennsylvania aspect that I wasn't looking at the date in the last episode, and that is that it was so close to the disappearance of Donna Lass. Donna Lass disappeared from the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino on September 6th of 1970, albeit in the morning, the early AM hours, sometime between 1:45 and 2 a.m. She was working the 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift at the Sahara Tahoe, where she worked at the first aid station as a nurse. Now, did the Zodiac killer abduct Donna Lass on September 6th, do something to her, then get a plane to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then go to Monroe, Pennsylvania, and murder John Leonard? And that's the Zodiac's plan? I think that that is a little bit far-fetched if both of those crimes are considered genuine Zodiac activity. And as far as we know, the Zodiac has much larger cooling off periods than a day and a half. Examples of this: the Zodiac committed the Lake Herman Road shooting on December 20th of 1968 and did not operate again until July 4th of 1969, roughly 7 months. Then there is a 2-month gap from July 4th of 1969 to September 27th, the Lake Berryessa stabbing. So that's a very substantial amount of time for a cooling off period, and even 2 weeks from the Lake Berryessa stabbing to the Stein murder on October 11th of 1969. So I'm not seeing anything in the Zodiac's activities that suggests that he would have abducted Donna Lass on September 6th and then murdered John Leonard on September 8th. Now, did the Zodiac killer actually abduct Donna Lass? I don't know, but what I think is much more important is people just seem to be attaching the Zodiac killer to any crime that has happened under the sun or in the darkness in the 1960s and 70s, particularly in the 60s, but even some of these crimes, as you see in the 1970s, such as the murder of John Leonard, and rest in peace to him, it seems like a very malicious crime that was directed toward John Leonard. Could it have been a personal motivation? The guy who targeted John Leonard seemed that he was out for blood, very similarly to the way the Zodiac killed Paul Stine, mind you, but the Zodiac's reason for killing Paul Stine could have easily been something that was cold, methodical, and calculating, as opposed to a personal vendetta. But I think that with John Leonard, that the reason why people are attributing this crime to the Zodiac killer is because there's a sketch of a man and a pair of glasses, and anybody who has worn dark-rimmed glasses in 1969 or 1970 and is also a Caucasian male is going to become a suspect. And now this person X, this mystery man from Monroe, Pennsylvania, is also a Zodiac killer suspect, and I don't like this type of thinking. And over the last several Zodiac killer news reports, I've been talking about the book Exposed by Mark Hewitt, which discusses the Zodiac Unabomber connection. And there is a very interesting note, and that is that the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, is of course a Zodiac killer suspect, but what I was reading in Exposed is that as a killer, the Unabomber wasn't a very good one, and what Mark Hewitt theorizes is that Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, really wanted to not only detonate a bomb that would hurt someone, but he also wanted it to be lethal and fatal, and he wanted the victims to not only experience pain but pass away. But the Unabomber didn't do that immediately. And I would like to go to one very specific incident that was described in the book that I thought was worthy of a discussion, and that is from the murder of Hugh Scruton, the Unabomber's 10th bombing victim. And this is actually an excerpt that has been written out by Jamie Gehring online, just to do a little bit of comparing and contrasting. Hugh Scruton was a victim of Ted Kaczynski's 10th bombing. Here's an excerpt. A computer store owner by the name of Hugh Scruton, age 38, discovers a package left behind at his store. He attempts to move it and the bomb explodes, ending his life. Hugh's mother described her son as soft-hearted and stated that, of his death, when a mother loses a child, well, I think that's about the hardest thing there is, and I can't lay my hands on him anymore. Nobody can change that. The court memorandum from the Unabomber trial describes Hugh as a man who embraced life and a gentle sense of humor, and had traveled around the world and climbed mountains and studied languages. From the same memorandum describing the murder is decoded from Kaczynski's crime journals. Experiment 97, December 11th, 1985. I planted a bomb, disguised to look like a scrap of lumber, behind the Rentec computer store in Sacramento. According to the San Francisco Examiner, December 20th, the operator or owner of the store was killed, blown to bits on December 12th. Excellent. Humane way to eliminate somebody. He probably never felt a thing. $25,000 reward offered. Rather flattering. So as you see, though, the Zodiac, the Unabomber wants to kill. The Unabomber wants people to die, and he isn't so much focused on the suffering as he is on mortality. And I think that that is something that's interesting to point out, because the previous victims, well, many of them have only been injured as opposed to dying. But the other thing that stood out to me was the fact that this device was meant to look like a scrap of lumber. And when I was watching the Unabomber movie with Robert Hayes, which I did a response to here on this channel, there's a recreation of the murder of Hugh Scruton, and I just thought it was so odd because there was this explosive device that had this flat top with 3 or 4 wooden pieces protruding outward, and it looked like something that you would want to pick up because a lot of people have been suspicious about the Unabomber's other devices. It's a suspicious package, or even something that's talking about you need to read a book, and very, very suspicious, but with the piece of lumber, it just looked like something that you would want to get out of the way. And in Exposed by Mark Hewitt even talks about how it looked like something that was a traffic device, like some type of thing that's meant to block people's tires, even though it's made of wood and not metal. And the Unabomber was getting craftier. And the Unabomber's getting his desire to kill, as Robert Graysmith put it. But is all of this in line with that of the Zodiac Killer? I think that this seems to be rather different because the Zodiac Killer definitely didn't mind inflicting pain onto the victims. I mean, prime example, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, or even the Blue Rock Spring shooting where Mike Michaud was more or less sprayed with bullets. But I would like to go to a particular section in the book Exposed that is going to be talking about a different type of attack, and this is one of the Unabomber's signatures when he not only committed the crime but he also left behind something. And there was a bomb that came with a note that said, "Woo, it works. I told you it would. RV." Woo was spelled W-U, like W-U, it works. I told you it would. RV. When no Woo and no RV were immediately identified, speculation arose that the bomber was trying to toy with his prey. It was later noticed that the words Woo and I would perfectly anagrammed to it would, when the bomber might have been communicating by anagramming letters or repeating seemingly random words or phrases eluded any interpretation. Okay. My challenge question to you is, do you think that this is something the Zodiac Killer would have written? Woo, it works. I told you it would. RV. That's something that the Unabomber wrote as a taunting phrase. There is a misspelling. There are initials used in odd places. But do you think that this is in line with that of the Zodiac? And I would like to go back to the murder of Hugh Scruton with this bomb disguised as a piece of lumber. I think that that is very different than the Zodiac's MO, because the Zodiac seems to show absolute indifference to the victims, and the Unabomber seems to be okay with inflicting pain onto people to a certain point, but then writing in his journal that the murder of Hugh Scruton is a humane way to kill someone. I have a few reservations about that. I mean, that just seems like something that is not in line with that of the Zodiac. Now, this thing about the code here, I know you guys want to hear my genuine response. Again, I think that it's a little bit too silly for even the Zodiac. And the Zodiac's a very silly guy, but I think that this thing that has been put forward is just a little bit different. But if you think that that's something that the Zodiac would have done using the woo and it would RV, please put your ideas in the comments section down below. And one final piece of Zodiac news that I would like to talk about is that there is a new Zodiac Killer book out by Paolo Gennari called Beyond the Fog of Time, Zodiac Killer, an Alternative Analysis. And I would like to read the description of Paolo's book that is available on Amazon.com. Who was the Zodiac Killer? Was he just a rogue madman or sadistic man who was sound of a criminal mind? What if he was something else entirely? Time has muddied the waters and kept the pain alive and shrouded it all in a dark fog. Only a thin line keeps the ciphers connected. We need to follow it and to go further and find new ways to uncover surprising and unexpected truths. Paolo Gennari is an Italian entrepreneur born in the 1970s and passionate about riddles and mysteries. He tackled the Zodiac ciphers using logic and his analysis and cryptographic skills. The result is a new and unusual reconstruction of the crimes that shocked California during the 1960s and 70s. And this is available on Kindle as well as in a paperback version. So, it actually looks like the Kindle version is now immediately available. So you can get that on Amazon.com if you're curious. Much like the previous Zodiac Killer news reports, I would like to conclude the episode with some true crime talk about a different subject, because there was a comment that came in from Victoria Van Cartier, who says, "Have you ever covered the disappearance of Beverly Potts? So up your alley. Letters mailed from the supposed killer, shades of the Zodiac, not suggesting that there is a connection, but a commonality, a fascinating case. And on this channel, I have not covered the disappearance of Beverly Potts, but I have read about it in the past. I've read about her in the past, and I maybe have briefly mentioned her once or twice, but I learned about Beverly Potts because of a rather unusual reason. Back in 2017, I was learning about a lot of true crime cases because of Wikipedia, of all places. And the first one that I learned about was the disappearance of Joan Risch, and that took place in 1961. And I also learned about the story of the Buckskin girl, who was an unidentified murder victim at the time, and she has since been identified as Marcia King of Arkansas. Rest in peace to her. And one of them that just Wikipedia recommended that I read was The Disappearance of Beverly Potts. And I would like to just read the article. Beverly Rose Potts was an American girl from Cleveland, Ohio, who in 1951 became the subject of a famous missing persons case when she disappeared only a few blocks from her home after attending a show in a nearby park. She has never been found and her disappearance remains unsolved. Blonde and blue-eyed Potts was described as a shy and quiet, responsible child, fascinated by the performing arts, who was to enter the 5th grade in autumn of 1951. At the time, she was living on Linnet Avenue with her parents, Robert and Elizabeth Potts, and her 22-year-old sister Anita. On August 24th, she and her friend and neighbor, Patsy, were given permission to go see the Show Wagon, an annual summer children's performance event that was being held at Halloran Park, less than a quarter of a mile from the girls' home. This was a special treat as the park was generally considered an unsafe location after dark when the trees dimmed the surrounding street lights. It was also frequented by the local vagrant population. The two girls initially went to the park on their bicycles around 7 p.m. At 8 p.m., deciding it would be easier to maneuver on foot through the large crowds in attendance, they returned back home to drop off their bikes. Arriving back at the show before 8:30 p.m., after about 8:45 p.m., Patsy Swing, who had promised to be home before dark, suggested they leave. Pod said that she had been given permission to stay for the entire show, which was not to end until 9, so Patsy Swing went back to her house alone. Swing last saw Potts in the crowd still watching the performance. At 9:30 p.m., she said the show ended and the park was empty when a 13-year-old boy who knew Potts saw her heading diagonally across the park in a northeasterly direction, about 150 yards from the corner of Linnet Avenue and West 117th Street. This would have been the quickest route to the Potts home, which would have only been a few minutes' walk away. The boy recognized Potts by her distinctive duck-like gait, with her toes pointing outward, and several other witnesses said they saw a girl resembling Potts near a battered 1937 Dodge Coupe idling on West 117th Street, apparently speaking to two young men inside. The various witnesses placed this encounter between 8:30 and 9:30 p.m., but none of them had seen the girl entering the car. When Potts did not return home by 10 p.m., her family began searching the area. About an hour later, they found no sign of her and called the police. The police immediately began a large-scale search of their own, but were unable to find any trace of Beverly Potts, even after several days of investigation, including door-to-door canvassing of nearby neighborhoods, tracing suspicious cars, and searching nearby vacant lots. Nearby cars as well, and using a plane to survey open rail cars. Police received an investigation and tips of thousands of telephone calls which had been spurred by the extensive press coverage of the disappearance, but none provided any solid leads. Potts's family members said they were quickly cleared, and investigators determined that her home life had been stable. So, I think that this sighting of the two guys in the car talking to Beverly might be the strongest lead, but Potts was known to be unusually shy, especially around men, and particularly cautious of strangers. Well, to throw in something else, these people who abduct children are usually very good at putting them into a false sense of security, so there is that. Investigators theorized that she had most likely been enticed into a house or car on her way home by someone she knew, perhaps with the promise of a babysitting job. Despite her youth, Potts was regularly hired as a sitter for neighborhood children. But a babysitting job at 9 p.m. after dark without notifying her parents? I mean, it's possible, but if she's already talking to these two guys in the car, that to me suggests that somebody may have lured her to a vehicle rather than the babysitting job. It was thought that Potts might have been killed by a neighbor or buried in one of the nearby houses on Leonard Avenue, and at least one search to the effect was carried out in 1973 in the basement of an auto body shop. However, no sign of Potts was found there, and no plausible suspect has been uncovered. And that's the biggest reason why I didn't talk about the disappearance of Beverly Potts in the past, because I really just wasn't sure what to say. There doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence. I mean, most likely she was abducted after this performance, but I mean, there really are not a lot of leads. Shortly after her disappearance, $1,500, or the equivalent of $15,660 in today's money, was offered by her father's union, the AFL Stagehands. Several suspects emerged over the years, but none can be definitively linked to the case. And I would definitely like to talk about the disappearance of Beverly Potts in the future. However, I think that at this point, there really are just not a lot of strong leads. Yes, people have lots of ideas, and it seems like she was definitely noticed leaving, and that someone was probably, I think, targeting this particular performance because they knew that there were going to be lots of people there, and the whole concept of it's so crowded it's private, and that person lured Beverly to a vehicle. That's just my initial response, but other than that, I'm not sure what I would have to add without a substantial amount of reading. And the final thing to share on this channel is, of course, the supporter shoutouts, and giving one to Batman66, regular supporter, and definitely someone who has shared a lot of info for the show. And this was a super thanks on YouTube, and it comes with a message saying more Zodiac, Jack the Ripper, and DB Cooper content requested, and that is a request that I can absolutely do. And thank you so much, Batman66, and anybody who makes a donation or contribution to help support the show will get a shout out on Zodiac Mondays. That's all from me now. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there was always BlackBoxNed88 over on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And I'll see you there. Goodbye.